welcome to another episode of Ask a Pianist. My name is Andrew Ahrens, and today we'll be continuing the discussion regarding how one can approach playing the opening movement of the Moonlight Sonata of Beethoven. In another episode, I demonstrated how it can be performed on the modern instrument, with a sound that mimics a forte piano with all dampers raised for the length of the piece. To get the sound atmosphere just right is one part of the puzzle. But the next part, the part that we'll focus on today, is perhaps the most complex piece of this puzzle. If the resonances are left to linger for the entire piece, what strategies can I use to still create a sense of phrasing, articulation, even crescendi and decrescendi? It's quite difficult to do, so I'm going to show you what works for me. First, let's consider what problems the pedal creates with simple issues like dynamics. Doing a crescendo in the pedal is actually quite easy, as the sound accumulates very quickly and it requires very little effort to increase our sound. Similarly, if we have notes in the bass register that require a crescendo, it's not too difficult to achieve this either. We actually don't need to play successive notes much louder than previous ones. The accumulation of sound creates the crescendo automatically without our effort. Creating a decrescendo, on the other hand, is difficult, because it is predicated on how long it takes for the resonances to decay. The factor is not necessarily how loud we play something, but how much time we have between notes in order for the sound to decay. To do a decrescendo with slow notes is relatively easy. However, to do a decrescendo with faster notes is a little more difficult. You actually have to underplay the notes to the point of almost missing them entirely in order to allow the resonances to diminish. It's one thing to deal with this issue with hands separate, but with the hands playing together, you have to accommodate the individual problems each register and musical texture has so that everything is balanced in terms of sound buildup and sound decay. Dynamic control in pedal is not only dependent upon how loud the note is played. Granted, the resonance is definitely affected by the dynamic of the note, no doubt, but the control of articulation and sound quality play just as important a role. You have to think about it this way. The dynamic level of the note being played determines how loud the note starts, but the articulation and sound quality you apply to the note determine how the note decays over time. You can play a note that is relatively loud and long-lasting, or, with some adjustments, you can play a note that is loud but appears to decay at a faster rate. This is the secret to how the Moonlight can be played. With the dampers raised the entire piece, you have notes which should all decay according to their own natural laws of sound production. However, you can rig the game so that some notes will decay faster than they should, and others might seem to be prolonged. How do we do this? Let's consider articulation for a moment. Listen to these notes played in the pedal as if I were playing the smoothest legato. Pay close attention to the sound of the notes right after they've been played. Now, I'll play the same notes, but I'll play them staccato in pedal. Once again, listen closely to what happens to the sound quality right after the notes have been played. When I play the notes staccato in the pedal, there's a sudden emptiness in sound quality just after the note is played. Compare this with the continuation of sound that happens when the note is played legato. Now, these represent two extremes, and pianists obviously play within those extremes in very subtle ways, most often mixing them. As an example, I'll play the same 5 notes, but with different articulations within. Some notes may seem easier to hear, and others may appear to be obliterated. Sound production control is linked quite closely with articulation, as playing something legato or staccato tends to affect precisely how we use our body. If you're able to spend some time experimenting, you'll find that there is quite a wide variety of sound possibilities that one can create within the pedal. The difficulty is learning how to control them and execute them whenever you'd like. All that being said, let's consider what we'd need to do in order to make the Moonlight come alive with all the usual phrasing and articulation that we'd normally have, if we were able to clear our pedal instead of holding it all the way. Let's take the first melodic phrase element that comes in the piece. For the moment, I'll play it while changing the dampers so that we can focus on the musical elements before we integrate the sound atmosphere. Let's say that I choose to make the phrase rise to the middle and then have a decrescendo when the harmony resolves. If I can raise and lower the dampers at will, then this phrase is quite easy to play and contour. But when played with dampers that cannot be lowered, then we find ourselves in a difficult spot by the top of the phrase. We have too much sound, and not enough time for the sound to decay in order to create a decrescendo. So what do? We can't slow down the piece, so we're forced into choosing ahead of time which notes will be loud and soft, and which notes will have long decays and which ones will have short ones. The first thing I consider is the melody. Can it work as played, or does it need to be adjusted in order for the phrasing to come out? Though it appears that it can work automatically, we can still rig the game a little in our favor. I'll play the phrase with a legato-style touch for the long notes, and a shorter, almost staccato-style touch for the short notes. The idea is that the short notes will seem to decay faster, allowing the decrescendo to take form. Similarly, we can apply this to the bass register. The long notes can be played rather legato, and the shorter notes can be played a little staccato. When we put it together, we get this. Now, that's not bad, but it could be much better. There's one factor that we have not yet talked about: harmony. One of the biggest problems of accumulation of resonance is centered on how much dissonance is created within that resonance. In other words, if I play a series of triads up and down the keyboard all in C major, we'll have a relatively full but clear resonance being created. But if I start to introduce keys which are not close to C major, such as F sharp major, then we start to get quite a lot of dissonance in the resonance, and the resonance clouds up. In the Moonlight, we have to not only select our sound production and articulation to determine how the resonance will be shaped, but we actually have to take into account how close notes are harmonically, because ultimately, if a note blends in with the surrounding harmonic resonance, it will appear to decay faster to an audience than a note that doesn't blend in. This has severe repercussions in this piece. The first phrase that we played has a point near the end where we may have conflicting notes in the resonance. The G sharp and the B both combine with the E naturally. But the F sharp doesn't. Now, this means that if we play the phrase all equal in terms of sound production, the F sharp will stay stubbornly in the resonance and interfere with the new E major that comes afterwards. But if we play the F sharp with a little less legato than all the others, but still with the same dynamic level, then the F sharp should seem to fall into the background by the time the E major segment appears. This approach can also be used in the bass register as well. Here's the left hand with a pedal that is changed. Now, we don't have to worry about the dissonance of the second long chord, because in truth, it's long enough to disappear into the background once we play the C sharps again. But the next set of notes is slightly problematic. With damper control, we could make a crescendo down to the low F sharps, with a small decrescendo on the Bs that lead to the E. This cannot be done if the pedal is not changed, however. Here's what we get. The F sharps linger long enough to interfere again with the E when it arrives. So, we can apply the same strategy for the low F sharps as we did for the F sharp in the right hand. Play it rather staccato, but at the same dynamic level, and let it disappear into the background so the E's sound good. The strategy could be summed up as this. First, consider what the melody is doing and create one that is ideal using sound production and articulation control. Then, double-check your choices against the harmonic resonance field to determine if there's anything that you can do to maximize your contour potential. For the most part, this movement is convenient regarding resonances. You don't have to do much in order for it to sound good. But there are one or two places where Beethoven throws you into the resonance deep end, and you have to find a way to swim out of it. I'll focus now on one of those areas. The second main phrase has tons of dissonance in it. If played neutral with no pedal changes, we get something like this. The reason all of the noise and interference exists is that Beethoven is moving in a semitone motion with both hands, and semitones are notorious for being dissonant with each other. In the right hand, it's that dreaded F sharp again. In the left hand, we have 4 semitone moves in octaves sequentially, which creates quite a lot of interference in the resonance. Of course, if we could change our pedal, we could have a nice, easy ride. But since we can't, we have to find ways to cut out the sound we don't want and maintain the sound we do. Let's look at it backwards. We want to end up with a relatively clear B minor major section, and the previous bar has notes which are convenient, to say the least. It all blends well, as long as we remember to shorten the resonance of the A sharps and C sharps. Now, let's go further back. We have this bar that goes to the second last one. first half, we're good. This chord matches the one in the next bar. But we have the two which interfere in between. The only thing we can do really is play these as lightly as possible, still maintaining the phrase and melody, but really treating it like bells ringing in the distance. So, lots of gentle staccato. Now, if we continue working backwards, we reach the bar of contention. In this case, we actually have to focus first solely on the bar itself without relating the chords around it. Each chord that is played has different notes to the one before, but it's only the last two chords that seem somewhat similar to each other. The first three, when played in succession, create so many dissonances that we're left with a question of not what to bring out, but what to keep while getting rid of everything else. The top G in the melody can be kept, because it will have decayed enough that the following F sharp will still sound clear. The E in the accompaniment can stay, but probably shouldn't be emphasized. The F sharps can stay because they blend in with the next chord. Now, what we're left with is the bare bones of what is problematic. To clear out the right hand, we have to drop the C natural, almost underplaying it because it'll be played by the bass already, so this one is somewhat redundant. We also have to underplay the A sharps in the bass, because no matter what, they'll provide a horrible clash with the subsequent Bs later on. And finally, we actually have to severely underplay the Bs as well that interfere with the diminished chord. In other words, our hierarchy should sound like this. Diminished chord moving to B minor. With a B octave in between that is even less present. The total package then sounds like this. As you can see, there's quite a lot of detail that we must go into, and I could go on and on over specific notes and their sound qualities. The complex voicing that is required in normal pieces of music is made infinitely more complex when we have to deal with open resonances like we do in this piece. But that being said, once we can hear and adapt to these problems, it makes our playing all the better when we face simpler music. I should tell you that the procedure I use for voicing this piece on the modern piano also works on the historical instrument, though it's far easier. The notes decay much faster, so the adjustments really only have to be made on the dynamic level, which is probably what Beethoven intended in the first place. This piece was not composed to be exceedingly difficult to play. It just happens to be because we're playing it on the wrong instrument. These things happen. So, that's it for this episode of Ask a Pianist. Until next time, keep practicing, and start experimenting with different touches and articulations within a held pedal. You'll be pleasantly surprised at what kinds of sounds you can produce. Bye for now.